Hi, I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each week we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today we are talking about The Iron Giant, the 1999 film directed by Brad Bird, screenplay by Tim McCanlies and Brad Bird. I'm joined today by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everybody.
Brian Bittner.
Hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
So before we jump in, our Spotify question for everyone is, what's your favorite animated film? Somehow choose and let us know in the Spotify app.
Really big question.
Yeah.
It's been really fun seeing all the answers to the Bill Murray questions also from the Lost in Translation. There's a lot of Groundhog Day, which is
of course
understandable. Yeah. But yeah, so let us know, Spotify listeners, what's your favorite animated film? Now, The Iron Giant. So I had never seen The Iron Giant. I feel like I'd seen lots of clips from it. I'm trying to figure out where even I would have seen those clips, but I think in various behind the scenes interviews with like Brad Bird, they'd show like a clip here or a clip there or something. So I feel like I'd seen a lot of it, but hadn't seen it start to finish. Obviously, I'd seen Ready Player One, which, is a very important part of the Iron Giants.
The sequel, right.
Right.
So it was cool to finally see it. But I want to hear from you guys, especially Trisha and Alex, who saw it way back when. What was your initial, viewing of this movie like? What was your relationship to it?
I don't remember the conditions super clearly, but I'm pretty sure I saw it in theaters in 1999 when it came out. And I think I was in middle school at that time. Watching it again reminded me how much this movie stuck with me. I didn't realize it was one of those animated films from my childhood that was so deeply seared in my memory. But rewatching it, it's like, oh yeah, I remember this feeling and this emotion and this music and this shot. And there was a lot of I just remember seeing it in the theater. It was an unusually emotional animated movie experience for me. And man, there's certain moments in this movie that do the Pixar thing for me, where it's like in isolation, I can see the moment at the end when the Iron Giant says Superman, just play me that clip and the moments that follow and the music and everything, and I will start to tear up without even seeing the rest of the movie before it. It just triggers something in me. So all that is to say, it was a very impactful movie on me, and I have not revisited it very often since then. And I'm kind of sad now because I watched it again last night, and it was like, wow, this movie is so well done. It feels so classic, and yet it was made at the turn of the century when we were moving towards computer animation and the more Pixar approach to everything. It felt like a Pixar movie done in an old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
Which is something really special and unique, and there's not many other examples like it. And of course, the Brad Bird effect. I could tell at the end when his name came on the screen, it was like, I didn't know who he was at the time. Now it makes so much sense that this movie is what it is. And it makes even more sense they went off and did movies with Pixar after this, because this is it feels very much in the same family as the kind of Pixar spirit of just going all the way with something where it's like, no, we're going to really make you cry. We're going to really talk about death. We're really going to do it. We're not going to just, tiptoe around it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really appreciate this movie, and I'm so glad we're talking about it, and I had a reason to watch it again.
Right. The Pixar movies that Brad Bird did being The Incredibles and Ratatouille and Incredibles 2, for anyone that doesn't know. Yeah. Trisha, what about you?
So I saw this movie in 1999, and I remember even then, I'm sure I was also in middle school, I remember feeling like I was seeing an underdog of a movie, right? I think I went to the theater several weekends after it opened, and we'd heard really good things. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of marketing for this. And, we can get into it because I did a bunch of reading into what happened to the theatrical release of this movie. And it was just studio nonsense, ultimately, where they didn't have any faith in the movie. And so they didn't set aside the budget or the proper amount of time to really get the marketing out there for it. And then they realized they had a great movie on their hands, and they thought about delaying to get all the tie-ins and all this stuff so they could sell all the toys and all of this and really push the marketing. But then they decided to go with their original release date, and nobody saw it because it wasn't in the public consciousness. So I even remember having a sense of that in 1999 of going
right.
People tell me I should see this movie. I'm sure classmates or somebody had said, go see The Iron Giant. It's really great. But I was like, why is no one seeing this? And there was nobody in the theater, really. I was with my family, and I remember being specifically with my mom, my little brother, and no one was there. And we walked out of it and we were like, wow, that was a great movie. We just saw a great movie in the theater. And even at the time, like I said, I was in middle school. I remember thinking like, solid, just like, what a great story. And it was this original story and felt so refreshing and, just perfectly executed. And it's just, so I've seen it a number of times since then. And I have the same feeling about it where I was just like, man, everybody slept on this. It's a really great movie. It's beautiful. I love how it looks. It has this like rich Americana sort of like look to it. It's inspired by all of these classic American artists like Norman Rockwell, which is the name of the town, and, N.C. Wyeth and some of my other favorite, like, classic American painters. And it just is such a great movie. And it's one of these movies that I feel like film buffs love, like sort of film people have our like sort of pet collection of movies where we're just like, we know about these movies. Maybe no one else does, or everyone else missed them at the time. But those of us cinephiles, we love all these movies. And for some reason, the Iron Giant always like ends up in that batch. So like on Twitter, you'll sometimes see people just being like, and anyway, the Iron Giant is amazing. And kind of holding it over there as like,
it's got a bit of a cult following.
It really does. Yeah. I still feel that way about it. What a lovely example of sort of, late 20th century animation that just kind of is a relic of its time in like the most, I don't know, endearing way possible.
Totally.
Yeah. It's weird because I feel like maybe this speaks to just the number of like cinephile people in my life. I totally missed it when it came out, but I feel like after it came out, I was being bombarded with like, you got to see it. Like, why haven't you seen this? Like, blah, blah, blah. And I think
then you didn't listen to them for 20 years.
That's a good way to create resistance in me. I'm just going to say. So that's why it was surprising when I then did go and do the research and saw that, by its fourth week, it had only made just under 19 million after a $50 million budget. So it definitely did not do well, which is surprising for me to hear, knowing how beloved it is now. Brian, what about you? This was your first time watching it?
Just like you, I had never seen it before. I think it was just wasn't terribly marketed, as you were saying, Tricia, but also I was 17 in 99, so I was seeing Fight Club and being John Malkovich in the theater, right? I wasn't going to see Iron Giant, and then for no good reason, just never caught up on it since then. I do really like Brad Bird, so it's been one of those movies on my list for the longest time of like, one of these days I need to watch Iron Giant, and just hadn't. Seeing it for the first time, obviously much older and so much later, I still felt it just worked. I sort of felt the magic of it. It kind of has, as you were saying, Alex, the weight of a Pixar film. And it has like the organic feel of a Miyazaki, where just like things feel like tangible. Like you're like this, I feel like these animated characters are there and I could like be there. And then it has also this classic feel of like an old Disney movie from, either
like
the
Bambi,
60s.
Like not just because of the deer, but like the forests. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was also just really cool to watch a somewhat recent in the age of film, hand-drawn animation movie. And even though the Iron Giant is largely CG, it doesn't really feel like it. So it's sort of, it's like my kid brain didn't understand that Little Mermaid and 101 Dalmatians were made 30 or 40 years apart or something, because it was like, oh, this all feels the same. And Iron Giant has that feel to it, where it's like, it feels like the things are not quite 24 frames a second. Like everything feels like a little jumpy in that way that sort of makes it feel a little bit warmer and a little bit more, I don't know, it gives it like
it's handcrafted, you have that
exactly.
more organic feeling.
All those things. Thank you.
Well, yeah, that's what was interesting watching it for me also is kind of picking up on that, where it did, like you're saying, it had the kind of Disney handcrafted feel, but also the Iron Giant and the way it moved in the frames. I was like, oh, this must be CG, but it's cool how they're blending it with the live action.
Yeah.
And then some of the camera moves, I was like, oh, this feels like this is like After Effects things happening. And so I looked it up, and this was like one of the first movies to really use After Effects and add like depth of field and stuff. So it was really cool to kind of see modern tools be used in the service of this organic textured feeling kind of thing like you're talking about.
So tell us about your experience watching it, Michael.
It was a very good movie. Again, I'd heard a lot about it, and I watched it, and it was like the things that I had heard, and I saw them happen on the screen in front of me. Thumbs up.
Trisha and I were yelling at Michael because he wasn't like sobbing and over the moon about this movie, but it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
There are just a lot of barriers that I think I have that are hard to overcome for a movie like this. Like animation is hard for me to sink into and like experience as if I'm in a world like that. It feels like there's a screen in front of me. Again, knowing the story so well, and I also just am always in my kind of analytical, technical mind. So I was thinking more about like, this is an After Effects camera move that's happening on top of this other thing during the scenes or whatever.
You're the worst person.
Truly.
As he says, Superman. Michael's like, oh, I can see the pixel count.
I mean, and I feel like it's the kind of thing where also it's, if you know story like I feel like with everything I knew about it and from everything about movies, from kind of like the first 5 minutes in, you're able to understand, okay, this is the story and this is where it's going to go. There were some surprises and turns, and I do feel like, as you were saying, Alex, that they take the time to address this pretty heavy theme of mortality and
Oh, yes.
Am I a gun? Like, what does that mean? What would that be like to be something that is a weapon that doesn't want to be a weapon? Like, there are definitely heavy things in there. And I thought that was really interesting to explore via Vin Diesel, who does a very
He's great.
good job. Yeah.
He's a wonderful voice actor.
He is.
Yeah, I mean, there's this difference that you can feel when you're watching a movie that's not Disney. And that even includes watching like Captain America or Iron Man 1, like the pre-Disney Marvel movies or something, where it's like there's certain things that were just like, we're not quite going to go to that place. And what I loved about this was, even though it felt like those classic Disney movies, it was like, yeah, but we are going to reference alcohol and sex, and like there's going to be like kind of a scary train crash, and we're going to mention religion, and we're going to the whole thing, like accepting death and like, do I have a soul and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it just felt like maybe Pixar, like Soul, for instance, is doing that. But for the most part, there's this sort of, these kinds of movies tend to not go there. So when they do, watching them as an adult, it's exciting because I feel like this movie is still for me, and it's not just like, oh, this is just for kids and that's it,
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of the Don Bluth animated movies and all of those ones that he made. And they all have this weird edge to them where they're like very upsetting. Not all the way, but so for those that don't know, like the classic Don Bluth is like All Dogs Go to Heaven or An American Tail or
American Tail, yeah.
That's Don Bluth.
Yeah.
Anastasia was sort of the last great Don Bluth movie, which is not Disney, although it often gets lumped in with those because it's a musical. But anyway, so Don Bluth made all of those sort of like weird, dark animated movies that were like the alt Disney kind of like thing that you could go see. And this feels like that to me. Like it has that sort of like weird edge vibe to it where there's something a little bit transgressive about it, even though it is ultimately really wholesome. It, kind of has this political edge to it, and also the darkness that you guys are kind of talking about. And, there's like a nuclear bomb strike at the end of this movie. And it kind of has that feel to it.
One of the emotions I was talking about that I remember so clearly from being in the theater was how scary the Iron Giant got.
Oh, yeah.
When it goes into like war activation mode, is very disturbing to see that, because he's been established as the big friendly best friend of the kid, and you do have there's the existential dread of like, oh, but he could just lose himself any minute and just destroy you and kill everybody. And the movie like does that. Like there's that junkyard scene where he almost kills the kid,
right,
which is really intense.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the meeting, it's like one of the best meeting the creature scenes from any like E.T. or I don't know if you guys have seen the original Pete's Dragon from way back, which is like super similar first act of those movies. Like the old crazy sailor is like, I saw this thing, and everyone's like, get out of here, you're just drunk. And the kid's like, then the kid finds it, But the fact that sequence where he meets the giant not only is like so beautifully shot, like that reveal shot, the power plant when you first see his eyes and things, but then it's like, it's scary and it's very active and things are happening, and like it's not just, ooh, there's a weird creature that I'm like gonna go and look at and touch and that kind of thing. It's like you are in danger and things are happening, and that does set the tone for what their relationship is going to be throughout the movie.
Mm-hmm. And it's a great introduction for Hogarth, too, even though we've already met Hogarth. Hogarth has his own great introduction in the diner. You know, that sequence that you're talking about, Brian, offers him a choice where he has to run in and pull the switch down to go save the giant because he's tangled in the power lines. It's like, it's just really good screenwriting. I don't know. You could probably do this with almost any scene in this movie, but sort of like break down why it's like an effective scene.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much about that power plant sequence that really works, not just visually, but from a character standpoint as well.
And the little payoff later where the giant brings him the switch. Now we understand the giant has he's like, because we don't know yet, right? If
exactly.
A complete dumb robot is whatever, but like, he has enough understanding to know a thing happened and you are responsible for the thing. And, just by him like dropping that switch in front of him.
Yeah. And speaking of intros, how much do you love, you're talking about the one with like the sailor and which I think is M. Emmett Walsh, right? Of course. But it's like, he's like, oh, I see the lighthouse. And then it turns and you see the two eye beams. It's just so coming out of the giant's face. It's just such a great visual and really scary, but such a great visual introduction for the giant.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many beautiful shots in this.
Oh my gosh.
I feel like that was the first moment where I was like, I see you, Brad Bird. Like that's the Brad Bird kind of like hyper, like using all of the tools, the visuals, everything to kind of tell the story and make every moment a surprise and keep a kind of visual momentum happening along with the story that's being told. That was definitely a cool moment.
For sure.
This episode of Beyond the Screenplay is brought to you by the new and improved Ting Mobile. When I'm going in to sign up for something like a phone plan, I'm looking for flexibility, and that's precisely what Ting Mobile provides. Whether you want a little data or unlimited data, Ting Mobile has a plan for you. You can get talk and text for just $10 a month, data from $15, 5 gigabytes for $25, unlimited for $45. Whatever you need, they have it. Just go to screenplay.ting.com to check out their plans and see how much you might save. Along with your plan, you'll get access to the best nationwide coverage in America, as well as Ting's award-winning customer service. And it's easy to switch to Ting, which, if you know me, you know I like things that are seamless and simple. Just head to screenplay.ting.com and check to see if your phone is compatible, which it most likely will be because Ting works with pretty much any phone, even the latest iPhone, Galaxy, and Pixel devices. Then just create an account, pick the plan that's right for you, and Ting will send you a SIM card that you can pop into your phone and activate in minutes. You can even keep your phone number. And you'll get a $25 credit when you sign up with our link, screenplay.ting.com. So see how much you could save and get $25 off at screenplay.ting.com. Thanks to Ting for sponsoring Beyond the Screenplay.
The whole thing where we then go from that into the diner, it's just so cleverly placed, I guess, in this like mid-century like time where it is, because it takes place in the 50s. So it gives it this rich visual style, but it's also so thematic where if you watch sci-fi movies from the 50s, they start this way, right? They start with like the introduction of a thing falls from outer space and then like somebody sees it on the outskirts of town. And it's referencing like 50s sci-fi paranoia in its, plot and construction as well as its visuals. And so, as a kid, you don't have to know that this is like, oh, we're doing like a Invasion of the Body Snatchers or, any of those like 50s sci-fi movie things that were referencing some of that stuff. But that's how it starts and what it is. And it's like, I don't know. It's just really cool.
Well, it's a great integration of, art style, themes that are relevant, the setting, like all of it is acting as one. And those are the best movies where it's just, we talked about Portrait of a Lady on Fire recently and had that movie very different from this one. I shouldn't compare them. But similarly, I think they do both try to have an integration across all those different levels. And I really appreciated that for the first time watching it as an adult. And just, wow, this movie is so efficient in so many ways and is also, doing theme in art, in plots, in setting, in time, all those things.
And they didn't want Brad Bird to make it set in the 50s. Like, they wanted him to, like, why can't it be in modern times? And he was basically like, because themes.
Right.
And because everything, but mostly because themes.
Just want to say, like, this movie isn't that different from Portrait of a Lady on Fire. You have the protagonist meeting this other character who may or may not be dangerous, but then they form a relationship, which is always a little tenuous. And they fall in love. It's great.
I was also getting some Terminator 2 vibes of
totally
adopting a robot that's like child, but also father figure question marks.
Right.
Yeah.
Also could be very dangerous.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And I thought what was interesting is the fact that we never get a backstory for the giant. We don't know why it's a robot with feelings, because it is tricky anytime you're like, look, I built this robot and it has feelings. You're like, what, why, how? But this is like, who knows? This is some alien technology. You can put himself back together, which affords you the ability to say, yeah, it has a soul because there is no explanation. So it can just be this thing. But it did also make me think how impressive Terminator 2 is that you do form a relationship with a total robot without the robot ever actually like having anything that we would call emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not talking about Terminator 2. Sorry, Michael.
Well, just that I happened to watch a deleted scene from the movie that they released, I guess, when they did the restoration or whatever.
So those aren't deleted scenes. Those are new scenes that they made in 2015.
Oh, interesting.
Really?
Yeah. I think they finished them. I think they were originally, they were storyboarded, but they hadn't been completed. And so they weren't included for that reason. Yeah.
Okay. But one of them is, when the giant is sleeping in the junkyard, there's like a dream sequence, basically.
Right. That wasn't in the movie, the version I watched, because I watched it on Hulu and it's like the original version.
Yeah.
But then I saw a video clip online of this dream sequence.
Right, which is interesting because it kind of does explain a backstory. Like, you kind of, by the end, extract this is a machine that has been built to be a weapon of some kind from outer space. But this dream sequence, like you see a bunch of iron giants like marching together toward like a city and images of destruction and the planet blowing up even at the end.
Wow.
And so it was just interesting how it did kind of fill in more backstory more clearly, I guess, of like, this is one of many potentially, robot people that has been built specifically to destroy worlds. And so it was just kind of interesting to have that backstory confirmed and actually like clarified to that level. And I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about knowing that. But I just thought it was interesting that was at one point in the movie, but not in the final version.
It's interesting because the conclusion almost confirms that anyway for me because of just how insane, the technology becomes. And, he has these like almost like black hole weapons or something.
He has a lot of weapons. He has a lot of different kinds of weapons.
Different kinds of awesome, incredible style weapons. So yeah, I think that was, to me, I just assumed, okay, this means he's designed just to destroy everything. And that's his real purpose. But the beauty of the movie is him, because of this amnesia dent in his head, he has this opening to form a different personality and path.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and at the time, this movie was criticized for being kind of an ET knockoff because there's a lot of similarities with like from just sort of the basic construction of like being from outer space, young, boy who needs a friend. They form a relationship, but the government wants to get the being from outer space. And there's, conflict in the boy's family. His dad's gone. Here are these other father figures for him. Anyway, it's like there's a lot that's there with E.T. And I think that those comparisons are valid, including the one where we don't know hardly anything about E.T. and sort of we don't really know anything about the giant either. So it's a wise move. It worked really well in E.T. It's a wise move not to like over-explain your being from outer space because you're placing the focus on the relationship that he's forming with, whoever it is on Earth.
Yeah, and ultimately the movie is not about the Iron Giant. The movie is about how the world reacts to this,
of course,
to this weapon. You know what I mean? So it's actually stronger thematically to not give us an explanation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Part of what you said was so edgy about the movie, Trisha, is that it does feel political, in a way that a lot of Disney movies probably wouldn't want to go there. It's making a pretty big statement about gun violence in a lot of ways. It's talking about just American militarism and the Cold War. It's doing a lot of really interesting things that you don't usually get from this like classic Disney aesthetic sort of movie. He even has characters like Dean. He's got like this beatnik character.
I love it.
With the kind of yin yang symbol on his bathrobe. He's drinking espresso and making junkyard art. Another weird feeling I had when I was that age was I was discovering who I was attracted to.
Did you have a crush on Dean? Because I have a huge crush on Dean.
I'm pretty sure Dean was my first like animated crush. Like I was like,
yes.
I'm really attracted to this animated character.
Same. Dean is a dreamboat.
His jawline, his stubble, like he's so cool. He sips espresso. Like
Harry Connick Jr.'s performance is there. He's a great character. I don't know. I want to talk about Dean more because he's a really great character. I mean,
I really love Dean. Yeah.
It's the way that the character's written, though. Like, there's really great writing in the dialogue and just sort of in the whole construction of who Dean is. We'll get to him, but yeah. No, I agree. I think E.T. comparisons aside, I think that there's enough, like you're saying, with like the Cold War and the very specific what the giant is. You know, no one really thinks that E.T. is like dangerous or going to destroy the world or whatever. Like, there's lots of really loaded sort of themes in who the giant actually is that I think differentiates this movie quite a bit in the sense that, like, I don't know, as someone who loves E.T. and who also loves the Iron Giant, I don't think of them as being the same movie. I think of them as being really dramatically different and or at least really special in their own ways.
It's also not the worst thing to be a lot like E.T.
It truly isn't. Like, make an E.T. knockoff. As long as you do a good job on it, you know, you win, as far as I'm concerned.
In some ways, I don't know if it's like the Pixar thing, but there's just this, like, you know, do what works, like go toward the fundamental storytelling things and use those things to tell your story. And so, yeah, I think this movie clearly had a lot of influences, but it does feel like you're saying, Trisha, that it's telling its own story that is unique and different and has a different theme and all that stuff. And it is interesting, you guys mentioning Dean, since we're here. I mean, we might as well.
Yay!
The Dean character, I think, was something that I had not encountered in my, you know, various clips or whatever that I've seen of the movie. And so he was definitely a surprise and is kind of this interesting, you know, he kind of is like a father figure ultimately, but he also doesn't seem so much older than Hogarth that he can't just be like an older brother. Also, I don't know. There was just it was a unique relationship, I feel like, that I hadn't seen before between Dean and Hogarth. And I feel like that their relationship is a big part of the movie also, and is one that I haven't seen on screen before.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's Dean and Kent, you know, Christopher McDonald's character, they may be the same age for all we know, but there's such different sides of the spectrum of the themes in this movie, where you have the beatnik character who feels like familiar, like he could be an older brother to the character, and he's like super chill with the giant, right? He's like, hey man, like let's all get along, it's all fine. And then you have Kent, who is this, I am a grown-up and I am the government and I am all these things, and like this is dangerous and we have to catch him, you know. So it is sort of that, it's not even about their actual age, but it's sort of about their maturity level and which things the people who are maybe trying to be more adult are being less so, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, and I think it's really interesting in the writing. So obviously Dean and Kent are set up to be, two sort of father figures potentially for Hogarth, right? Mm-hmm. Or two different models of men, if you want to just put it that way.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Kent is constantly infantilizing Hogarth. Like, he's calling him sport and, you know, scout, and the like 18 things that he calls him in that sequence, which are really great. He's like, hey, buddy. But he's kind of talking down to Hogarth and trying to control Hogarth and basically, you know, taking all decision-making power or all agency away from Hogarth and treating him like a kid.
Yeah.
Really aggressively. Like, he moves into their house.
Right.
Starts trying to act like he's in charge of Hogarth, essentially, right? In contrast to Dean, who is constantly asking, like, Hogarth, what do you want? How can I help? Like, what do you feel about this thing? And so, you know, you have the scene where Dean invites him in and gives him coffee, and they like are talking about, you know, Hogarth's problems at school and whatever. And he's like, no, just be yourself, kid. Like, he is giving agency and like helping Hogarth. You know, it's kind of a coming of age story for Hogarth. And Dean is there to sort of facilitate that and treat Hogarth like an adult, essentially, or like at least entrust him with some responsibility. He's still looking out for Hogarth, right? Like, he's ultimately, you know, the scene where he saves Hogarth, like tackles him out of the way because the giant's going to shoot him, is just like a really beautiful scene where he's the one actually looking out for Hogarth, even though he seems like he's, you know, doesn't care what Hogarth does, right? So it's this
That might be my favorite scene.
lovely
Actually.
revelation that Dean has got his back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And Harry Connick Jr.'s performance in that scene, like he's
Mhm.
genuinely rattled. Like he is really protective of Hogarth and is really scared for him in that moment. And I really appreciate this usually chill, just kind of whatever goes guy. He really cares in that moment. You can feel it in the performance.
Sure.
And that he understands the gravity of the situation also. That,
Right.
like, he's able to, understand that this is a seemingly friendly giant, but also when laser beams start coming out, like, this is a serious problem that needs to be taken seriously. And so seeing how afraid that makes Dean, I feel like, is also what makes Giant feel so sad. Like,
Right.
seeing how much he has put fear into other people
So sad.
makes him
That's a good point.
do his sad walk away.
Yeah.
Because it starts snowing immediately then.
The snowfall is amazing.
immediate
Right.
snowfall.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point that you just raised, Michael, which is that Dean's reaction in that scene is such a contrast to everything we've seen from Dean thus far. So, like, when the giant jumps in the lake and creates a huge tidal wave, and then we see Dean just floating, but while still sitting in his beach chair, and like his facial expression doesn't change, right? That's how we're used to seeing Dean react.
I love that moment when the truck drives up. And he's like, "You're in the road."
Yeah.
Yeah. Such a perfect like comedic beat.
Exactly.
Well, and it's interesting going back to Kent. Like there's so many little tiny moments that I find so hilarious in this movie. Like when
Same.
the pot holder is on the wall with just like the goofy like dog face or whatever that is. Like how, like he feels so like ashamed and lame talking to this like higher up general who's dismissing his claims. He can't stand to look at this like silly dog face looking back at him because that's how he feels, and he has to turn it around to like not see it. There's little touches like that. They really give away like character psychology that don't have to be there, but I can just feel Brad Bird having some fun.
Yeah. There's, again, I feel like I've talked about this a few times recently, but one of the best traits for like a villain is just raging insecurity.
Yes.
Of course.
Which is just Kent's. It's just the most insecure person of all time.
Yeah, I think that was what reminded me of Miyazaki was, like you were saying, Alex, those little moments that don't have to be there, but just make the movie feel like, oh, now this feels like a real thing. And it doesn't just feel like we did the bare minimum to like animate this story, the way we had to. And having just watched Ratatouille for the first time too, like the animations of this non-human character in both movies, which sort of feel so true to the thing it is, whether it's a rat or a robot, but then also feel like they translate to human emotions so well too. The giant sort of, you have the playful animations where he's like learning how to sit and everything, but he's so kind of sterile at the beginning, but then you see him, he has sort of this confused smile the way that his face is designed, as opposed to like Iron Man, right, where his face is designed to like look pissed off all the time. Iron Giant is like always sort of like kind of curious and excited to like see what's next. And then throughout the course of the movie, like his eyes start changing, like even the colors start changing and that kind of thing, to then the point, maybe my favorite payoff of this like animation evolution that happens with this character is when they're falling, just the care with which he cradles Hogarth. He's just like so careful to hold him, and it just feels so tender and human for this character that we have only spent 80 minutes with, to see him go from being this machine to being a person, for lack of a better word.
Why didn't he put him down? He could have just put him down also. But
well, the eagles could just come and fly him too.
The thing that made me laugh was when he like saves the kids who are falling off the building near the end. It's like he puts out like a very like a hard metal surface below them, as opposed to like this like right above the snow they're about to fall in.
Right.
Did he save them, or did he just make it more painful?
Yeah.
Lots of little moments like that throughout for me.
But I feel like one of the Brad Birdy kind of things that you can see in this a lot in the Giant's design is that his individual pieces seem to be sentient.
Right.
Where when his hand is like, I love the sequence.
It has like a head, like
right, where his hand is in the house and like it's, crawling around, and it is essentially like a mini version of the Iron Giant that's, in the house. It's just such a cleverly, it's such a clever extension of what might you have to do if you had a giant like in your house, right? Or, that kind of thing.
Like what antics, what fun and games can we have here?
It's a really, I mean, I feel like with movies like this, the fun and games are the thing that set it like a cut above. Like you're talking about, Brian, like you could do the bare minimum,
Right.
but something that puts it a cut above is pushing the premise and imagining what might this also entail. So if all of his pieces can crawl back to him, and, when he's been dismantled or whatever, what is the logical extension of that? Well, are they not then maybe somewhat sentient? Are they not maybe mini robots or mini, versions of the giant himself? And if so, what does that mean? And so I love that as a design for a sequence. And that sequence in the house is just so much fun.
It is fun. It is the one of the few times in the movie, though, where I went, oh, this is just the writers going, well, it's a giant. Like, we can't take it trick-or-treating. Right. We can't, like, sneak it into the grocery store or whatever, So it's like, what do you do? Well, let's just take a piece of it and put it in the house, and then it can get into all the antics and stuff like that. It's still fun, but it was one of the moments from like, oh, they did this because they're like, there's only so much you can do with a giant. When it's like the whole fun of, I have a secret creature friend is the sort of in-the-house antics.
The near misses.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and you have to hide it, right? And when it's a 50-foot giant, your hiding places are pretty limited. So, that makes sense. But I still think it's really fun.
Yeah, but like watching it, I was like, this is, absolutely really fun, fun and games situation, and watching all the near misses and all that stuff, and the way that the hand animated and travels is kind of like evokes, like a dog or some kind of animal where one of the fingers is...
It has like one finger, as the head.
Its head, yeah.
Right, so they find a way to make it, you can like read the personality of it. My brain was then going, why does this have a personality? Can it see out of its finger? Why is it watching TV out of its finger?
It is watching TV.
Yeah, I think I had that thought when I was watching. I'm like, Michael's going to be bothered that this finger looks like all the other fingers, and yet it is acting differently, like a different organ.
I mean, and it's all like, again, I think it's all like fun and good. It's just like those logical like bumps that sometimes make me like stop and think about it. And then I go off into a tangent of like, well, yeah, how would you like, what should it be if not that? And like, the movie is not concerned with that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't pertain to the theme. And that's the whole thing. I do feel like this is kind of bumping up against one of the things that I was thinking about while watching the movie, and kind of harkens back to our conversation about Ratatouille, where we were talking about on the Patreon exclusive episode for Ratatouille, that part of what was weird is not like the allegory of the rats to humans, and kind of not quite understanding. I was having trouble like kind of buying in of like, what are we saying about humans via the rats? Like, do I think of these characters as actual rats, or do I think of them as stand-ins for humans? And sometimes it's both and sometimes it's neither. I was having a little bit of that with the giant, where I have never considered myself a weapon, and so I've never like pondered, am like, what does it mean for me to be a gun or not? There are obviously ways where humans can be violent, and like you can extrapolate. It was so clearly about like, I don't want to be a gun, that I was having a little bit of trouble like making that leap and reaching the empathy of like, oh yeah, I've wondered also like, what does it mean to be a gun? And like, what would I do if I were a gun? So just saying that out loud.
Yeah, I mean, the original book by Ted Hughes was written during the Cold War and very much about the Cold War, so you have, I'm going to save some of this for my lesson, but you have this idea of there is this scary opponent that that we don't know what's going to happen with this, and we have to be on the defensive all the time, What you're not thinking about is that's also how the opponent feels. Right. So the Cold War was this time of everyone feeling like their own country was either the weapon or the thing that the weapon was pointed at, So I think it was, at which we've seen in our lifetime too, obviously, right? With just sort of, there is this entity out there that is scary and we don't understand it. But also, what does that make us do? It makes us become on the offensive. And now we're the scary thing. And now we are, pointing fingers and possibly doing much worse things, because now that's who we are. So I think that to me, that's sort of what I got from it was, I agree with you. It's like, oh, I'm not identifying with, what if I was born as a killing machine or whatever, but it is this idea of like, peace is a two-way street. basically. So it's like you are seeing this scary other, but it's actually being humanized rather than just being this like thing that's out there somewhere in the world.
And there's a very deliberate construction in this movie about like the giant only becomes a gun when people are pointing guns at him.
Right.
And so that's like a very Cold War, like you're talking about kind of, reciprocal violence, right?
Yeah.
Where the Cold War is all about like who's going to strike first. And that's going to bring about the end of like, all life essentially. If someone, pushes the button first, pretty much. And so Dean is, running around trying to get everybody to stop firing at the giant because that's what's causing his reaction to be a gun. And so I think within that construction, Hogarth very clearly framing it to him as a choice of like, they might continue shooting at you, but you have to make the nonviolent choice in response, I think is a very human message, right? We get defensive. We're not designed to automatically be killing machines any more than the giant is. But when we feel like people are threatening our lives or when we feel like there's violence around us, we have the option to give a nonviolent response instead of the immediate violent, counter reaction. And so for me, the allegory is rock solid. It's also thematically built in, like we said, to the world.
Yeah.
And to the giant as a character, which, it's Dean that finds out really early on, oh, Hogarth was pointing a ray gun at him. That's why he responded the way that he did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like the giant isn't a stand-in for an individual. It's a stand-in for just
a society,
a social
right
phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. I think so. The allegory works. Michael.
So there.
Rock solid thematically. I mean, I don't know. Can a giant have a soul? Like it's made of metal. That's a big question. I think that the movie strays into that it probably doesn't need to.
Yeah.
But just to establish that it does have sentience, right? That he can make a choice because we see that earlier where he fires at Hogarth. We never would have thought the giant would do that. So the fact that he can choose something different later on, we kind of have to stray into soul territory. But yeah.
Right. And the other important narrative question is the giant eats, does it poop?
Yeah.
I mean, I've thought a lot about that.
Infinitely eats metal.
Yeah. Metal poop. Why would it be hungry? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there were already a lot of like toilet humor jokes. So I don't know. I think it doesn't because why didn't they? I feel like they would have made use of that unless that's a deleted scene somewhere.
There wasn't that much toilet humor. There was just the laxative.
There was 100% more than you would expect, like than you would see in a Disney movie, perhaps.
Yeah, that's the first thing I should have cited when I was talking about how edgy this movie is. It's just the amount of poop that's in it.
Yeah.
Why don't we go around and say what lessons we're going to take from the Iron Giant? Before we do, again, just want to remind people we have a Patreon. It's been very fun. This week on the Discord, there's been a lot of just news updates about casting of Knives Out. That's how I find out about who's cast as I go to our Discord and people are talking about it. And Brian, I think you offered up your own custom casting of what you would want to see. So it's a lot of fun conversation, as always, over on the Discord. Okay, so lessons from Iron Giant. Alex, do you want to start?
I mentioned earlier just how efficient this movie is. And one of the scenes that really struck me as being a great example of doing a ton of things at once is that opening diner scene where we meet so many of the characters. You've got Hogarth bringing in a pet animal that he feels bad for, that he wants to take care of. And it's in a long line of, wild animals he's wanted to take care of. We meet his mom and find out just kind of what the family situation is. She's a single mom, overworked, loves her kid, but is just kind of like stressed out. We get to meet Dean and we see how Dean stands up for the kook, the town kook, and the way he goes out of his way to deal with the squirrel in his pants to not, get Hogarth in trouble. So it's just a really great example of what I think most scenes of the movie are doing, which is either doing a setup or a payoff or doing something thematically or all those things at once. It's less than 90 minutes, but it feels like a really full movie. Like it doesn't feel like a skimpy 87 minutes. It feels like a full-fledged. I almost felt like it was a 2-hour movie from all that I got out of it. It's a very short animated movie. And that's just a testament to the writers and to Brad Bird for just making sure every scene was doing something and not having even the fun and games still they were often setting up a setup that was going to come back to emotionally devastate you later. And I really respect the care they put into making sure every scene of this movie counted and wasn't just there for, toys, making, Iron Giant toys.
Right.
And we got to have another type of Iron Giant. So here's another thing, it doesn't feel like the movie's worrying about any of that. It's just about streamlining and maximum emotional effect. So yeah, I love this movie. It's so good.
Agree.
Like you said, the care that's being taken, you can really feel that. And I feel like that is kind of has become a Brad Bird like hallmark almost of everything. Care is being taken to tell the story first and foremost.
And you can tell that he had an unusual amount of creative control. Like I said, nobody was expecting much from this movie, and it was on a really rushed timeline. And so they basically were letting him make, even though it was his directorial debut, they were letting him make a lot of just decisions on his own, as long as he was keeping the thing on schedule. So yet another great argument for giving creative control to the creatives.
Imagine that.
Indeed. Yeah, Trisha, what's your lesson?
Just want to talk briefly about the design of Hogarth as a protagonist, because this kind of like kid and creature movie only works if you have a really great kid. And
Right.
Hogarth is a really great kid. He is just fearless and really funny. He's got this rebellious streak, but you're right, Alex. The first thing that we see about him is that he wants to take care of something, and he's compassionate. And so I love the scene where his mom is like, okay, I have to work late at the diner, don't stay up late, don't watch any scary movies, don't eat any junk food. He's like, sure, of course not, I definitely won't. And then, of course, we see him doing exactly that. So we know he's disobedient and stubborn, which are things that he's going to need later. He has to have that to outsmart Kent and to be willing to stand up to Kent. We know that he is curious and fearless. He goes out into the woods. Like, he prefers to watch scary movies. He goes out into the woods at night. It's just a wonderful like alchemy of character traits for a young hero. He has everything that he ultimately ends up needing. And all of it is set up right at the beginning, and developed and sprinkled throughout, that makes him A, really lovable, and B, gives him everything that he's going to need to ultimately be a really good friend. And sort of like, the giant has to care about people. So it has to care about Hogarth, but Hogarth also has to have this like beautiful humanity to him that the giant can choose and model, right? Because ultimately the giant is modeling who Hogarth is.
Right.
And so this is just like a lovely design for a protagonist, and especially for a young one. So
Yeah, exactly. Like, Hogarth is so well designed in all the ways that you just spelled out. Like, he does everything for this movie, like, but effortlessly also. Like, I feel like he's effortlessly everything in a way that only happens from like meticulous thought and planning. And the voice actor is really good also.
It's
like
really good voice acting.
Eli Marienthal.
Yeah, like definitely helps sell all of it.
Turns out kids are people. So anytime you're designing a kid protagonist, you could just design a protagonist, because kids are also people. I'm just saying.
They have emotions, complexity.
Kids are people. TM.
Yeah.
Awesome. Brian, what's your lesson?
Yeah, we talked about it a lot, but this is just a great example of how to use time and place, setting to support your story and your theme. Obviously, again, the source material comes out of not too long after the actual time it was set, but regardless, like Trisha was saying, the studio wanted to set it in modern day and have like a hip hop dancing dog or whatever, like just all that kind of stuff. Like, no, thank you. Yeah, the Cold War is such a powerful setting to introduce the idea of a weapon everyone is scared of, who will only attack if you attack it first. There's a quote by Brad Bird where he says, "The main setting looks Norman Rockwell idyllic on the outside, but inside everything is just about to boil over. Everyone was scared of the bomb, the Russians, Sputnik, even rock and roll. This clenched Ward Cleaver smile masking fear, which is really what the Kent character was all about. It was the perfect environment to drop a 50-foot tall robot into." And that is, again, why there is so much of that 50s sci-fi, because so much of it was an allegory for what was going on at the time.
Exactly.
And I think that what's cool, too, is if you are familiar with the Cold War, then it enhances the movie. But if you're not, then the movie enhances history, because then when you do learn about it, you're like, oh, like just go watch The Iron Giant. That's what it was like. That's what, you know, the way that this town feels. That's how everyone felt for like a decade, or like what, 2 decades? Like it was a while. I don't know how much of it was like super intense, but it was quite a while. Yeah, the Cold War is like really long, but I don't know how much of it was like the like super intense part of it. But yeah, just like if you change the setting of this movie, it entirely changes. It just takes all the power out of what the setting can do for the theme.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of like what you were saying earlier, Alex, of this idea of all these things are working together, like in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, where like they're all just enhancing everything in a really powerful way.
Exactly.
Yeah, my lesson is kind of just I was really impressed with the visual storytelling, and I think that's something that animation can and does do often. Is like I almost want to watch the movie again on mute and see if that would like engage me in a different way, like if that would shut off parts of my brain that get in the way of me just like soaking in everything. And I think the story would be like kind of just as powerful. And Trisha, you brought up that moment early on when the giant first lands, where the ship guy is like, that's the lighthouse, and then the head turns and it's the like, I feel like this film is like every scene has some like version of that, where it just feels like the visual momentum is constant. It's surprising you, it's dynamic, it just keeps it engaging to watch, while also constantly telling the story in a creative and fun way. I very much appreciate that, and the care, to use the word that you used, Alex, the care that goes into designing a story like this and to make all of that happen. So thumbs up, visual storytelling. Iron Giant. I am Superman. Did I do it?
He just says Superman.
I am Groot. I understand that casting 100% now.
Yeah.
Vin Diesel is very good at getting a lot of emotion out of
not very many words.
Not many,
like
syllables.
saying a couple of words in his deep Vin Diesel voice.
Right. Cool. Why don't we go around and say what we've been watching recently? Brian, what have you been watching recently?
So I watched the Small Axe films by Steve McQueen, the current Steve McQueen, and that's Small AXE, not ACTS, as my girlfriend thought when I was telling her about it for like the week during which she's like, "Oh, that you were saying axe?" But it's based on this proverb that if you are the big tree, we are the small axe, because it depicts the lives of West Indian immigrants in London from the 1960s to the 1980s. Obviously, mostly the racial injustice that they were dealing with and how they were dealing with it. A lot of the characters are real people, so it's talking about their lives, but in some cases there are no real characters. It's doing a thematic thing, or it's doing just sort of this is what this is like. It was presented as a series on the BBC. It's now on Amazon Prime, and it's interesting because it was like a series but of movies, and like most of the movies are an hour to an hour and a half long, so they're sort of not even presented as like full feature-length films. The first one is Mangrove. It's 2 hours, and it's the only one that really feels like, oh, this is like a film. Like I could have seen this in a theater. The two leads are Sean Parks and Letitia Wright, and they're just both insanely good, and they have all these like great scenes together. Letitia Wright now is joining Daniel Kaluuya as a cast member of Black Panther, who then went on to play a Black Panther this year. But yeah, the other 4 movies are all, like I said, 60 to 90 minutes long, and they sort of don't try to be movies, like especially Lovers Rock, the second one. It's just like we're at a dance party and we're just kind of watching people do stuff. And by the end, you're like, I watched a story, but there are just long periods where you're just sort of like meandering through the crowd, watching things happen and stuff in a way that feels really beautiful. And the one with John Boyega, Red, White, and Blue, it feels like the pilot for a show that I'm mad I can't watch now because it's sort of like this great story about this police officer. And then at the end, I'm like, cool, I want to see what happens next, because it's not like, and then that's the end of his life. It's like, oh, this is the beginning of his life. Let's see episode 2. But yeah, so it's 5 films all based around this same setting and theme and narrative that none of them have anything to do with each other, but they all speak to each other very clearly in a way that makes them really interesting to watch them all within the course of, a few days or something. So yeah, Small Axe.
Nice. I've heard really good things.
Yeah.
Alex, what have you been watching?
So I watched a recent 60 Minutes episode, which was about the subject of UAPs, which is the like fancy government way of saying UFOs. It's unidentified aerial
Ooh.
phenomenon. UFOs are having a moment right now because basically the government's having to admit that they've seen a bunch of stuff that they can't explain. And it's happened enough times now that like the Pentagon is like investigating and going to release like unclassify a bunch of documents in June. So 60 Minutes was interviewing a guy who was working for the Pentagon, like leading the investigation. And I'm just going to read a quote of what he said. Imagine a technology that can do 6 to 700 G forces, that can fly at 13,000 miles an hour, that can evade radar, and that can fly through air and water and possibly space. And by the way, has no obvious signs of propulsion, no wings, no control surfaces, and yet can defy the natural effects of Earth's gravity. That's the kind of things we're seeing.
Wow.
So this is 60 Minutes. This is like the most boring of news, programs, interviewing multiple Navy pilots, people at the Pentagon, talking about like crazy things they've seen and can't explain. And it's happened enough times now. Like there's pilots saying they saw stuff every day for like years over the Pacific Ocean. And they don't know if it's foreign countries have crazy technology we don't know about, if it's even from this planet. Like it's an actual legitimate news story.
It's an Iron Giant.
And it was very appropriate because then I watched the Iron Giant the next day and I was like, wow, this feels very on theme. Check out the 60 Minutes episode about UAPs. It's very interesting.
I think it's more Flight of the Navigator, which we can talk about another time.
Uh-huh.
That was a good one. I liked that one.
So yeah, there's something out there. The government is admitting it, and they don't know what it is. So
wow,
that is what is happening.
I love it. It probably, I want it to be aliens.
I really do too.
I hope it is.
I feel like it'd be a good sign.
One of the stories that they had these two Navy pilots on the show to talk about, and they're like, we are normal people. We don't believe in UFOs. We would think this is crazy if anybody else told us this, but we were both in our fighter jets at the same time. And there was a tic-tac shaped object the size of our jets with absolutely no features on its surface, like moving through the air and mimicking our movements and then disappearing. So like,
wow,
that's the kind of things like Navy pilots are saying. So I just want to know what's going on. I'm really excited about it in a weird way.
Love it.
Excellent. I guess kind of in the vein of now military things and wars and all that stuff. Malcolm Gladwell came out with a new book, a new audio book that then became a book. It's like a extrapolation from like a 4-part series he did on his podcast. And so it's called The Bomber Mafia, A Dream, A Temptation, and the Longest Night of the Second World War. And it's a dive into both war and World War II done in a way that I've never seen before, where it's looking at like fighter jets and I guess not jets, but bombers, and this idea of post World War I, which was this awful war in which millions of people died. There was this idea that if we could use bombers, we could use these surgical strikes to hit certain points in the enemy's territory, and we could end wars without big armies having to fight. And it was this, this dream of like, can we fight a quote unquote clean war? And so it's kind of following these obsessive idealists as they try to make this thing happen. And it goes into, even just the mechanics of how do you, if you're flying a plane going 300 miles an hour and you're thousands of feet in the air, how do you hit a bomb? It goes into, or how do you drop a bomb on a thing? So it talks about this, like the technical stuff, but it also talks about just kind of like the psychology of people and the psychology of war, and what does it look like when an idea that you've invested your entire identity into shatters in front of you. And all of this is kind of happening during, the Second Great War. And so the stakes are high, and it kind of results in this insane, the night where probably the most human lives were ever lost in a short period of time. So it's this really epic thing. I might have even talked about, this is part of his podcast series that came out last year, but this goes even further in depth, and it's just a really fascinating look at war and human psychology. And if you're into fighters and bombers, there's lots of fun stuff there. So The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell, definitely recommend.
Nice. I mean, I'm very into World War II planes.
I think you would like it. I think it would be up your alley.
Yeah.
And Trisha, last but not least, I know you watched something on CuriosityStream, who is the sponsor of this episode. CuriosityStream is the streaming service featuring thousands of documentaries and nonfiction titles. Trisha, what did you watch?
So I was clicking around on CuriosityStream, looking for something else to scratch my documentary nonfiction storytelling itch here. And I saw that they have this Eames documentary about Charles and Ray Eames, the artists and furniture designers who I trust you all have heard of, who were a husband and wife team. Anyway, this documentary came out in 2011. It's called Eames, the Architect and the Painter. And it's directed by Jason Cohn and Bill Jersey. And it was really fascinating. I basically knew nothing about the life of the Eames, who they were, how they got together, how they ended up making the most iconic furniture in American history, probably. But they have a lot of amazing footage, obviously, and really great interviews with people who worked in the Eames like design office. And so lots of great interviews. There's also an interview with Paul Schrader, who's a filmmaker and screenwriter that I really love. And anyway, he has a lot of interesting things to say because the Eames also made films, which I didn't know that either. Learned a lot about them. Anyway, it's a really great documentary over on CuriosityStream.
Awesome. If you, listener, want to check out Eames, the Architect and the Painter, and support Beyond the Screenplay, sign up for CuriosityStream at curiositystream.com/screenplay. The link is also in the show notes. And when you sign up for CuriosityStream, you get free access to Nebula, the streaming service featuring exclusive and ad-free content from some of the best educational creators out there, including many of our past guests, Lindsay Ellis, Maggie Mae Fish, Just Right, and Patrick Willems, whose short film conclusion to his ongoing storyline will be premiering exclusively on Nebula. So sign up for CuriosityStream at curiositystream.com/screenplay or by using the link in the show notes. Well, this has been our conversation about The Iron Giant. We want to say thank you, as always, to the patrons that make this show possible. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major, and our editor, Eric Schneider. I'm Michael Tucker, and I've been joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. All of our Twitter handles are in the show notes. As always, send us a tweet and say hi. If you're enjoying the podcast, tell a friend about it. Consider supporting us on Patreon, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.